On what seemed like an ordinary day, a white police officer is called to a predominantly black neighborhood for a routine disturbance. But as he steps out of his patrol car, a small black girl approaches him, her eyes wide with fear. She whispers a simple question, one that pulls him into a world of deep-seated racial injustice, setting off a chain of events that neither of them will ever forget. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. A steady breeze swept across the street as Officer Ryan stepped out of his patrol car, his boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud. He had been called to this neighborhood a few times before, mostly for noise complaints or minor disturbances, but there was something about today that felt different. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the rows of aging brick houses in this predominantly black neighborhood. Ryan adjusted his belt, trying to shake the uneasy feeling settling in his chest. Just as he reached for his radio, a small figure appeared in the corner of his eye. A girl, no more than 9 or 10, stood just off the sidewalk, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal to her chest. She looked frightened, her wide eyes darting nervously, as if she wasn't sure if she should approach or run. Ryan's hand hovered over his radio, but something about the girl's expression stopped him. Slowly, he turned toward her and crouched down slightly, trying to seem less intimidating. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond right away. Her small body was trembling, and her knuckles were white from holding the stuffed animal so tightly. She was wearing clothes that were far too big for her, hand-me-downs most likely, and they were dirty, like she hadn't had a proper wash in days. As she took a hesitant step forward, Ryan could see her lips moving, barely forming words. He leaned in a little closer, trying to catch what she was saying. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Help me!" Ryan blinked, his heart skipping a beat. The girl's voice was filled with so much fear, so much desperation, that it sent a chill down his spine. But it was what she said next that froze him in place. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice quivering with terror. "They're going to hurt us." Ryan's mind raced as he processed the girl's words. Who was coming? Who was going to hurt her? He scanned the area quickly, his training kicking in, but there was no immediate danger in sight. Still, the urgency in her voice couldn't be ignored. Without hesitation, he reached for his radio. "This is Officer Ryan. I need backup on Jefferson and 3rd, immediately," he said, keeping his voice calm, though inside he could feel the tension rising. "Situation is potentially dangerous. Repeat, I need backup now." He turned back to the girl, trying to calm her down. "You're safe with me," he assured her, kneeling to her level. "Can you tell me what's going on? Who's trying to hurt you?" The girl's eyes welled up with tears, and she shook her head, clutching the stuffed animal even tighter. "They took the others," she said in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "And they'll come back for me." Ryan's heart clenched at her words. Others? What others? He had to get more information, but the girl was clearly traumatized. He reached out gently, his hand hovering near her arm, but not touching, not wanting to scare her. "I'm going to help you, I promise," he said softly. "But I need you to tell me more. Who took the others?" The girl sniffled and wiped at her nose with the back of her hand. She looked up at him with eyes filled with so much pain that it made his chest tighten. "Bad men," she said. "They said they'd take me too, but I ran." Ryan felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy fog. Whoever these bad men were, they weren't just a threat to this little girl. They were a danger to anyone in the neighborhood. And if there were others, other children, he couldn't waste time. "Okay," he said, his voice firm now. "We're going to keep you safe, but we need to go somewhere safe right now, all right? I'm not going to let anything happen to you." The girl nodded, her grip on the stuffed animal loosening just a little, as if she was beginning to trust him. Ryan stood up slowly, scanning the area again, and he saw the first of his backup arriving. His partner, Officer Jenkins, stepped out of the squad car, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. "What's going on?" Jenkins asked as he approached. Ryan gestured toward the girl. "She says some men took other kids, and they're coming back for her." Jenkins' expression darkened, and he glanced around, tension rippling through him. "You sure?" Ryan nodded. "We need to find out where those kids are, and fast." They moved quickly, shielding the girl as more officers arrived on the scene. Ryan kept close to her, watching as she cautiously glanced at the new arrivals. Each time she flinched slightly, as if still unsure whether to trust them. Ryan knelt down beside her again. "Do you know where the other kids are?" he asked gently. "Can you show us?" The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. She pointed down the street toward a rundown building at the far end of the block, its windows boarded up and graffiti covering its walls. "That's where they are," she whispered. "That's where they keep us." Ryan's blood ran cold. It all made sense now. The urgency, the fear, the cryptic whispers. This wasn't just a routine disturbance. This was something far worse. "We need to move now," Ryan said to Jenkins, his voice sharp with purpose. He turned to the girl once more, his expression softening. "You're safe with us, okay? We're going to get them out of there." The girl nodded again, her eyes still wide with fear. But there was a flicker of hope in them now. Ryan stood up and gave the signal to the other officers. It was time to act, time to save those kids. They moved swiftly, but Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. He glanced down at the girl one more time, her small hand gripping his sleeve tightly. "We've got you," he whispered, more to himself than to her. But as they made their way toward the building, Ryan knew that this night was far from over, and that the truth they were about to uncover might be darker than any of them could have imagined. They moved as a unit, the squad of officers keeping low as they approached the decrepit building. The girl, now shielded by Jenkins, stayed behind with one of the other officers. Ryan led the way, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the graffiti-covered walls and broken windows. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to thicken, tension gripping them all as they prepared for whatever might be waiting inside. "Stay sharp," Ryan murmured to Jenkins, his hand hovering over his holster. The building looked like it had been abandoned for years, yet the feeling of danger was palpable. There was no telling what kind of operation was being run here, but if the girls' fear was any indication, it was far worse than they could have imagined. Ryan's mind flashed back to the little black girl's trembling voice, the terror in her eyes as she spoke about the others. He felt a surge of anger, his protective instincts kicking in. Whoever these men were, they had targeted innocent children. Children like her. His gut told him this wasn't just some small-time operation. This had the markings of something darker, more organized. Jenkins moved ahead to check one of the side entrances, motioning for Ryan to take the front. As Ryan approached the door, his heart pounded in his chest. He could hear muffled sounds inside, but they were faint, nothing clear enough to make out. He gave Jenkins a nod, signaling they were ready to breach. With one swift motion, Ryan kicked in the door, the wood splintering under his boot. The darkness inside was thick, the air stifling. The officers fanned out, their flashlights sweeping through the abandoned space. Ryan's pulse quickened as the light caught glimpses of broken furniture and scattered debris. The place reeked of neglect and something else, something sour and rotten. Suddenly, a noise from the far end of the room caught his attention. He froze, his flashlight zeroing in on a shadow that darted behind a stack of crates. His grip on his weapon tightened as he advanced, motioning for Jenkins to follow. "Police!" Ryan called out. "Come out with your hands up!" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then slowly, a figure emerged. It wasn't what Ryan expected. Instead of an armed man or an adult accomplice, it was a child, a boy no older than 10, with wide, terrified eyes. His clothes were ragged, his face streaked with dirt. The boy's lip quivered as he raised his hands, shaking in fear. Ryan lowered his gun slightly, his heart sinking. "It's okay, kid. You're safe now," he said softly, glancing back at Jenkins. "We're here to help." The boy didn't speak. He just stood there, trembling. Ryan moved closer, crouching down to his level, trying to reassure him. "Are there others here?" Ryan asked gently. The boy nodded slowly, his eyes darting nervously toward the back of the room. Ryan's stomach dropped. If there were more kids here, it meant they had stumbled onto something bigger than they anticipated. Just then, Jenkins appeared behind him, his face grim. "Ryan, we've got movement in the back," he said in a low voice. "We need to move fast." Ryan stood up, his jaw tightening. He turned to the boy, giving him a reassuring look. "Stay with Officer Jenkins, okay? We're going to get you out of here." The boy nodded again, his eyes still filled with fear, but there was a flicker of relief in them now. Ryan knew he had to move quickly, but as he and Jenkins made their way deeper into the building, his mind kept returning to the girl's words. They're going to hurt us. Whoever was running this operation was clearly dangerous, and they wouldn't hesitate to harm these kids if they felt cornered. As they approached the back of the building, Ryan could hear muffled voices, adults this time, low and menacing. He exchanged a glance with Jenkins, who nodded in silent agreement. They were about to confront whoever was behind this nightmare. Ryan's heart pounded as he moved closer, his weapon drawn, his senses on high alert. Just as they reached the final door, Jenkins motioned for him to stop. Ryan strained to listen, trying to make out the conversation on the other side. "They're on to us," a gruff voice said. "We need to move the rest of the kids before they find them." Ryan's blood ran cold. They weren't just holding the children here. They were planning to move them, maybe to another location, to keep them hidden from authorities. Jenkins didn't wait any longer. He kicked the door open, and the two officers burst into the room, guns raised. Inside, they found two men, both armed, both standing near a set of cages that held more children. The sight made Ryan's stomach turn, but he pushed the emotion aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Drop your weapons," Ryan shouted. One of the men hesitated, his hand twitching toward his gun. But before he could draw, Jenkins fired a warning shot, and the man's hand flew up in surrender. The second man, clearly more frightened, quickly followed suit, dropping his weapon to the ground with a clatter. Ryan moved in swiftly, securing the men with handcuffs while Jenkins radioed for more backup. The kids, about half a dozen of them, sat huddled in the cages, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Ryan's heart ached at the sight of them, dirty, terrified, their young lives already scarred by cruelty they should never have experienced. As the other officers arrived, Ryan unlocked the cages, one by one, gently coaxing the children out. They were hesitant at first, but when they saw the kindness in Ryan's eyes, they slowly began to trust him. "You're safe now," he whispered to each one, his voice thick with emotion. The relief in the air was almost tangible as the last child was freed. Ryan turned to Jenkins, who looked equally shaken by what they had just uncovered. "We did it," Jenkins muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "We got them out." But for Ryan, the victory was bittersweet. His thoughts kept drifting back to the little girl who had started all of this. Without her, they might never have found these kids. Her courage had saved them all. As Ryan stepped outside into the cool night air, the girl was there, waiting by the patrol car. She looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes, clutching her stuffed animal once again. "Are they safe?" she asked in a small voice. Ryan crouched down beside her, a soft smile on his face. "Yeah," he said gently. "They're all safe now, thanks to you." The girl's lip trembled, and for the first time since Ryan had met her, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Ryan stood up slowly, his gaze still fixed on the girl who had been brave enough to escape and seek help. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The operation had been a success, yes, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. If this little girl hadn't managed to break free, the fate of those children would have been sealed in darkness. The weight of that reality pressed down on him. "Hey, Ryan," Jenkins called, stepping out of the building. "More units are on the way to comb through the place. We're going to need statements from the kids. Might take a while to process everything." Ryan nodded absent-mindedly. His focus was still on the girl, who stood quietly beside the squad car, her small fingers gripping the stuffed animal she clung to like a lifeline. She had risked everything to help the other children, yet something told him she had seen more than what she had said. He felt a pang of guilt. She was just a kid, and yet here she was carrying the weight of a nightmare that no one her age should endure. He approached her cautiously, his tone soft as he knelt beside her again. "You did something really brave tonight," he said. "Because of you, we saved those kids. You should be proud of yourself." The girl looked down at the ground, her expression still clouded with fear. "They're not all safe," she whispered. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "They have other places," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "They keep moving us around so people don't find out." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He glanced over at Jenkins, who was busy on his radio. The idea that there were more children out there, still trapped, still living in fear, made his blood run cold. "Do you know where the other places are?" he asked gently, not wanting to overwhelm her, but knowing they needed every scrap of information they could get. The girl hesitated, biting her lip. "I think so," she said after a long pause, "but it's hard to remember. We never stayed in one place for long." Ryan placed a hand on her shoulder, careful not to startle her. "It's okay. We'll figure it out together." As more officers arrived on the scene, Ryan motioned for Jenkins to join him. The two of them stood a few feet away from the girl, their voices low as they discussed what she had just told him. "We need to get her into protective custody," Jenkins said. "If what she's saying is true, there's a bigger network at play here, and they'll want to cover their tracks." Ryan nodded. "Agreed, but we also need to find out where these other places are before they have a chance to move the kids again." "I'll get in touch with Child Services," Jenkins said, pulling out his phone. "They'll take care of her while we dig deeper into this." Ryan glanced back at the girl, his chest tightening with a sense of protectiveness he hadn't expected. He had seen plenty of tough cases over the years, but this one was different. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him with those wide, fearful eyes, trusting him when she had every reason not to trust anyone. Or maybe it was the knowledge that, without her, those kids would still be locked away in that horrible place. As Jenkins arranged for Child Services, Ryan walked back over to the girl. "We're going to take you somewhere safe for tonight," he told her. "You'll be with people who can help you, and I promise we won't stop until we find the other kids." The girl looked up at him, her expression filled with both fear and a faint glimmer of hope. "Will they be okay?" she asked softly. "The other kids?" Ryan nodded firmly. "We're going to make sure of it." She didn't say anything, but the way she hugged her stuffed animal a little closer told him that she believed him. It was a small victory, but it was a start. As the officers continued to comb through the building, Ryan's thoughts drifted to the larger picture. This wasn't just about one group of children. This was about a system that had allowed something so horrific to happen in the first place. He thought about the girl's neighborhood, the way it had been neglected for years, and the way the authorities often treated people living there as an afterthought. It was no coincidence that these predators had targeted this community, where too often the cries for help went unheard. "Hey," Jenkins called, walking back over with his phone still in hand. "Child Services is on the way. We'll make sure she's taken care of." Ryan nodded, but there was a part of him that didn't want to let the girl out of his sight. He knew it was irrational. There were procedures in place, people trained to handle situations like this, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was personal now. As they waited for Child Services to arrive, Ryan stayed close to the girl, keeping her company as the minutes ticked by. He asked her small questions, nothing heavy, just little things to keep her mind off what had happened. He asked about her stuffed animal, what its name was, if she liked cartoons. She answered in quiet, one-word replies, but he could see her start to relax a little. When the social worker finally pulled up, a kind-looking woman stepped out of the car and approached them. She knelt down to the girl's level, introducing herself with a gentle smile. "Hi there, sweetheart," the woman said softly. "My name is Ms. Robbins. I'm going to take you to a safe place where you can rest, okay?" The girl glanced up at Ryan, her eyes asking a silent question. Ryan gave her a reassuring nod. "You'll be all right," he said. "Ms. Robbins is going to take good care of you." The girl hesitated for a moment, then finally nodded. She reached out and took Ms. Robbins's hand, her fingers still clutching the stuffed animal. As they walked toward the car, Ryan felt a strange emptiness settle over him. He had done his part, but it didn't feel like enough. Not yet. As the car drove away, Ryan watched it disappear down the street, his mind racing with everything that still needed to be done. He had made a promise to that little girl, and to himself, that they would find the others, and he wasn't going to stop until they did. Jenkins came up beside him, his expression grim. "You think she'll be all right?" Ryan nodded slowly. "She's tough. She'll be okay. But we've got work to do." Jenkins let out a low whistle. "Yeah, this isn't over." "No," Ryan agreed. "Not by a long shot." The night was far from over, but Ryan knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to rest until every last child was safe, no matter how long it took. The next morning, Ryan woke up with a sense of purpose burning in his chest. He had barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the events over and over. The little black girl's words still echoed in his head. They keep moving us around. It wasn't just about the kids they had rescued. It was about the ones still out there, trapped in a cycle of fear and exploitation. Ryan arrived at the station early, and it wasn't long before Jenkins showed up too, his face lined with the same exhaustion Ryan felt. They sat down together in the briefing room, going over the reports from the night before. "Turns out that building was just one of several," Jenkins said, his voice low as he flipped through the files. "There are whispers of a larger network, but nobody seems to know exactly who's behind it." Ryan gritted his teeth, a surge of frustration rising in him. "We can't let them slip through our fingers. We need to hit every lead we've got." Jenkins nodded in agreement. "We've already put out alerts to surrounding precincts. If they try to move more kids, we'll be ready." But as much as Ryan wanted to believe that, he knew they were up against something much bigger than a local operation. Whoever was behind this was organized, methodical. They had chosen their victims carefully, kids from vulnerable communities, mostly black, whose disappearances would go unnoticed by the wider public. It made Ryan's blood boil. These kids were being preyed on, simply because society had turned its back on them. "We need to do better than just wait for a lead to fall into our laps," Ryan said, his jaw tight with determination. "I'm not sitting around while these people destroy more lives." Jenkins studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed, but we need more intel. We can't go in blind." Ryan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He thought about the girl, about what she must have seen and endured. If they could get her to remember more details, they might have a shot at tracking down the other locations before it was too late. "We need to talk to her again," Ryan said, meeting Jenkins's gaze. "She might know more than she realizes." Jenkins sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, but she's just a kid, Ryan. We can't push her too hard." Ryan nodded. "I know, but we don't have time to wait. If she can help us, we need to give her the chance." Later that morning, Ryan and Jenkins made their way to the child services facility, where the girl, now under the protective care of Ms. Robbins, was staying. The place was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. Ryan's stomach twisted with anticipation as they walked inside, his mind racing with how to approach the conversation. Ms. Robbins greeted them at the door, her expression warm but serious. "She's still a bit shaken, but she's doing better," she said softly. "I think having some space away from all of it has helped her." Ryan nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what they were about to ask. "We don't want to pressure her," he said, "but we think she might be able to help us find the other kids." Ms. Robbins gave him a thoughtful look, then led them to a small room where the girl sat, quietly coloring in a book. Her stuffed animal was by her side, and though she still looked wary, there was a hint of peace in her demeanor now. Ryan knelt down beside her, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. "How are you doing today?" The girl looked up at him, her big eyes searching his face for reassurance. "Okay," she whispered, hugging her stuffed animal close. "I'm really glad you're safe," Ryan continued, offering her a small smile. "You helped us a lot last night, you know that? You were really brave." The girl blinked, not quite sure what to say. Ryan didn't push her. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside her, letting the silence stretch for a moment. After a beat, he spoke again. "We're still trying to help your friends," he said gently. "But we need to know if you remember anything else, anything that might help us find them." The girl's hands tightened around her stuffed animal, and for a moment Ryan wondered if he had pushed too far. But then she took a deep breath and looked up at him. "There was a man," she said quietly. "He was in charge. He was scary, but he didn't come around a lot. He just told the others what to do." Ryan's heart raced. "Do you remember what he looked like?" She shook her head. "Not really. He was always in the shadows, but I heard him say something once. He said they were going to take us somewhere far away, somewhere nobody would find us." Jenkins, who had been listening quietly from the corner, stepped forward. "Do you know where that might be?" The girl hesitated, her brow furrowed in concentration. I don't know, but I think it was near a big building, like a factory. I remember hearing a lot of noise, like machines." Ryan's mind raced. A factory. That could narrow things down, but they still needed more. "Do you remember anything else about the place?" he asked softly. "Anything at all?" The girl bit her lip, thinking hard. "There were trains," she said after a long pause. "I could hear them at night outside the windows." Ryan exchanged a glance with Jenkins, a factory near train tracks. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it gave them a place to start. "You've been really brave," Ryan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Because of you, we're going to find those other kids." The girl gave him a small, hesitant smile, though her eyes still held the weight of everything she had been through. Ryan stood up, feeling a surge of determination rise within him. They were one step closer. As they left the facility, Ryan turned to Jenkins. "We need to start searching factories near train lines. Cross-reference it with any reports of suspicious activity." Jenkins nodded. "I'll get the team on it." Ryan glanced back toward the building where the girl sat, still lost in her own world. He made a silent promise to her and the children still out there. They would find them. No matter how long it took, no matter how far they had to go, they would bring them home. Ryan spent the rest of the day chasing down leads, combing through maps and cross-referencing every factory near train tracks in the surrounding area. The feeling of urgency gnawed at him, pushing him to dig deeper, work faster. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime for the kids still trapped out there. Back at the station, Jenkins was on the phone with contacts from neighboring precincts, trying to piece together a larger picture of the trafficking network they had stumbled upon. It was clear now that this wasn't just a small-time operation. These men knew what they were doing, hiding the kids in plain sight, moving them from place to place, so they would be harder to track. Ryan's frustration grew as each call turned up little new information. The factory near the train tracks was a solid lead, but there were too many options, too many places to sift through. They needed something more, some clue that would narrow it down before the traffickers moved the kids again. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with an incoming call from Jenkins. Ryan answered immediately. "Ryan, I think we've got something," Jenkins said, his voice laced with urgency. "There's an old warehouse just outside the city, near the industrial district. It matches the girl's description, a factory near train tracks, and we've had a couple of tips about strange activity in the area over the past few weeks." Ryan felt a flicker of hope spark in his chest. "Do we have any surveillance or patrols out there?" "Not yet, but we can get a team there in under an hour," Jenkins replied. Ryan didn't hesitate. "Let's move. We're not letting them slip away." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, his pulse quickening with anticipation. This could be it, the break they needed. As he rushed through the station, his mind replayed the girl's terrified expression, the way her voice trembled when she spoke about the others. He couldn't let them down. Not now. Within minutes, Ryan and Jenkins were in their patrol car, the lights flashing as they sped toward the industrial district. The streets were quiet, the fading sunlight casting long shadows over the warehouses and factories that lined the road. As they approached the location, Ryan felt a knot of tension tightening in his chest. The warehouse was larger than he had expected, its towering structure looming against the skyline. The place looked deserted from the outside, but Ryan knew better than to trust appearances. If this was the hideout, the traffickers would have gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. They pulled up to a nearby alley, parking their car out of sight. Ryan and Jenkins exchanged a brief, tense glance before stepping out and approaching the warehouse on foot, moving quietly and sticking to the shadows. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal, the distant rumble of a train echoing somewhere in the distance. Ryan's hand hovered over his gun as they reached the side entrance, a heavy metal door that looked rusted shut. He pressed his ear to the door, listening for any sign of movement inside. There was nothing but silence. Jenkins nodded toward the door, signaling that he was ready. Ryan gave a quick nod in return, and with one swift motion, he kicked the door open. The sound of the door crashing against the wall echoed through the empty warehouse, but for a few tense moments, there was no response. Ryan and Jenkins stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they scanned the vast, empty space. The place was filled with old machinery, crates, and stacks of wooden pallets, but no sign of life. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as they moved deeper into the warehouse. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on them, the eerie stillness making every step feel heavier than the last. Suddenly, a faint sound reached his ears, a muffled cry, barely audible, coming from somewhere in the back of the building. Ryan froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to Jenkins. Jenkins nodded, his expression tense. "Yeah, let's go." They moved quickly but cautiously, following the sound toward the rear of the warehouse. As they rounded the corner, Ryan's flashlight illuminated a row of metal cages, each one barely large enough to hold a child. His stomach turned at the sight. There, huddled in the cages, were more children, small, frightened, and dirty, just like the girl they had saved. Ryan felt a surge of anger and determination rush through him. These kids had been hidden away, locked up like animals, waiting to be moved to God knows where. "Jenkins, call it in," Ryan said through gritted teeth. "We need backup now." Jenkins was already on his radio, his voice steady as he relayed their location and the urgent need for support. Ryan knelt down beside one of the cages, his flashlight shining on the face of a little boy who couldn't have been older than 7. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, his small body trembling. "It's okay," Ryan said softly, his heart aching at the sight of the terrified child. "We're here to help you. You're safe now." The boy didn't respond, too scared to move or speak. Ryan looked around, searching for a way to open the cages. His flashlight caught the glint of a padlock on each one, and his frustration mounted. "We need bolt cutters," he called out to Jenkins. "These kids aren't going anywhere unless we can get them out of these cages." Jenkins nodded, his face grim as he continued to communicate with the backup units. "They're on their way." Ryan turned back to the children, his voice gentle but firm. "You're going to be okay," he reassured them. "We're going to get you out of here, and no one's going to hurt you again." As he spoke, he could hear the sound of footsteps approaching, the backup team arriving just in time. The other officers rushed in, cutting through the padlocks and freeing the children one by one. Ryan watched as the kids slowly emerged from their cages, their expressions a mix of fear, confusion, and relief. One of the officers approached Ryan, a pair of bolt cutters in hand. "We've got this," the officer said, nodding toward the cages. "You should check the rest of the building. Make sure we didn't miss anyone." Ryan hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on the children, but then nodded. There could still be more of them hidden somewhere in the warehouse, and he wasn't going to leave until he was sure every last one of them was safe. He and Jenkins moved quickly, sweeping the rest of the building with the backup team. They checked every corner, every room, leaving no stone unturned. But as they finished their search, it became clear that this was it. These were the last of the kids, at least in this location. Relief washed over Ryan as they made their way back to the group of rescued children. The officers were already escorting them outside, loading them into waiting patrol cars that would take them to safety. Ryan's eyes scanned the group, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and sadness. They had saved these kids, but there were still others out there, other children who hadn't been so lucky. He knew their work was far from over. As the last of the children were placed in the cars, Ryan turned to Jenkins, who was leaning against the side of the building, his arms crossed over his chest. "We did good tonight," Jenkins said, his voice tired but satisfied. Ryan nodded, though his mind was still racing. "Yeah," he agreed. "But it's not over." Jenkins sighed. "No, it's not." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the patrol cars drove off into the night. Ryan felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a lingering sense of dread. This wasn't just about rescuing a few kids. It was about dismantling a system that preyed on the most vulnerable, and that would take more than one raid. "We'll get them all," Ryan said, more to himself than to Jenkins. "We have to." The air outside the warehouse was heavy with a sense of relief and urgency. The kids were safe, for now, but Ryan's mind was far from settled. The operation had only peeled back the first layer of a much larger, darker truth. Somewhere out there, other children were still in danger, hidden in places just like this one. As the last patrol car pulled away with the rescued children, Ryan and Jenkins stayed behind, watching the scene unfold with a shared sense of exhaustion. Officers moved in and out of the warehouse, collecting evidence, taking photographs, and documenting the scene. It was part of the process, but to Ryan, it felt more like a hollow routine. These were lives, not just cases. "We'll need to get statements from the kids as soon as they're stable," Jenkins said, rubbing his temples. "Might take some time, but it's the only way we'll find the other locations." Ryan nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened streets around them. We can't wait too long. These people, whoever's running this, they're smart. They'll know we're closing in. Jenkins exhaled deeply. We'll get them, Ryan. We just need to play it smart. But Ryan's gut was telling him something else. Playing it smart had its place, but every moment they spent waiting was a moment those children didn't have. He thought about the girl they had saved earlier, how she had whispered about other places, other kids still waiting in the shadows for someone to come for them. As they headed back to their patrol car, Jenkins turned to him, his face lined with exhaustion. You think she knows more? He asked, referring to the girl. Ryan sighed. Maybe. She's been through a lot. There's only so much we can ask of her. But she's our best chance of finding the rest of these kids. Jenkins nodded, and they drove in silence for a while, the weight of the night pressing down on both of them. The sun had barely begun to rise when they reached the precinct, the orange glow casting long shadows over the buildings. Once inside, they were met by Captain Morris, who had been briefed on the raid. The captain's face was a mix of relief and concern. Good work out there, both of you, he said, his tone firm but appreciative. But we're just getting started. Ryan glanced at Jenkins, who gave him a knowing look. We need more intel, Ryan said, getting straight to the point. The girl we rescued knows about other locations. She's hinted that they're moving the kids constantly. Captain Morris frowned, crossing his arms. I don't want to pressure her more than necessary, but if she has information that can help us, we need to act on it fast. These people are ruthless, and if they get spooked, they'll disappear. Ryan nodded. I agree, but we have to be careful. She's just a kid, and she's been through hell. The captain's eyes softened, and he let out a slow breath. You're right. We'll work with child services, see if we can bring her in for another conversation. On her terms. Ryan felt a flicker of hope. They were closer now, closer to unraveling the network that had stolen these kids' innocence, their freedom. But every step forward felt like it could lead to something even darker. Later that afternoon, Ryan found himself back at the child services facility. Ms. Robbins greeted him with a warm but weary smile, leading him once again to the room where the girl was staying. She was sitting at a small table, drawing in a coloring book with a few bright crayons. The stuffed animal was still by her side, a constant companion. Ryan sat down across from her, giving her a gentle smile. Hey there, how are you doing today? The girl looked up from her drawing, her eyes tired but a little less haunted than before. Okay, she whispered. Ryan took a deep breath. He didn't want to push too hard, but time was running out. I was wondering if you could help me a little more, he said softly. You told me about the bad men and the other kids. Do you remember anything else that could help us find them? The girl's hands tightened around her crayon, and for a moment Ryan thought she might shut down. But then she looked at him with a flicker of determination in her eyes. There's another place, she said quietly. It's far from here. A big building, like the last one, but different. I heard the men talking about it. They said they'd take us there if things got too dangerous. Ryan's pulse quickened. This was it, the lead they needed. Do you remember where it is, or how they talked about getting there? The girl hesitated, her brow furrowed in concentration. They talked about the trains, she said finally. They said they'd take the train to get there, somewhere near the water. Ryan's mind raced, trying to piece together the clues. A factory near train tracks, close to water. It wasn't much, but it narrowed the search down significantly. You've been so brave, Ryan said, his voice thick with gratitude. Because of you, we're going to find those kids. I promise. The girl gave him a small, tentative smile, though her eyes still carried the weight of everything she had been through. Ryan stood up, giving her one last reassuring look, before heading out to relay the information to Jenkins and the captain. When Ryan returned to the station, the energy was electric. Everyone was on high alert, the new intel sending waves through the precinct. They mapped out every location that fit the girl's description, cross-referencing it with reports of suspicious activity near train yards and industrial areas by the water. It didn't take long for one location to stand out, an old factory near the port, just outside of town. This is it, Ryan said, pointing to the map. It has to be. Jenkins nodded, his face set with determination. I'll get a team together. We move as soon as possible. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Officers suited up, briefed on the plan to raid the factory. Every detail was meticulously planned, but the tension in the air was thick. They knew they were walking into something dangerous. By the time the raid was ready to begin, the sun had set, casting the port in a dim, foreboding light. Ryan, Jenkins, and a team of officers approached the factory under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the sound of the nearby waves crashing against the shore. The factory loomed ahead, its windows dark, its silhouette ominous against the night sky. Ryan's heart pounded as they moved in, his weapon drawn, every nerve on edge. This was their chance. They couldn't afford to fail. They reached the side entrance, and Ryan gave Jenkins a nod. With one swift motion, they breached the door, flooding the factory with light. But what they found inside sent a chill down Ryan's spine. The factory was empty, abandoned. No children, no traffickers. Just a few scattered pieces of machinery and the eerie sound of the waves outside. For a moment, Ryan stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what had happened. Had they been too late? Had the traffickers moved the kids again? "Ryan," Jenkins called from across the room, his voice tense. "You need to see this." Ryan hurried over, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Scrawled across one of the walls in red spray paint were the words, "We know you're coming." Ryan stared at the ominous message on the wall, his mind racing. The traffickers had known they were coming. Somehow they had been tipped off, and now the children were gone, moved to another location, or worse. The air in the factory felt heavy with disappointment and frustration. All the planning, all the hope they had carried into the raid was now replaced with a sinking feeling of dread. Jenkins stepped up beside him, his face pale under the harsh light of the flashlights. "They've been one step ahead of us the whole time," he muttered, shaking his head. "How the hell did they know we were coming?" Ryan clenched his fist, the rage building in his chest. "Someone must have warned them," he said, his voice low but fierce. "They've got eyes on us, or someone on the inside." Jenkins nodded, though the idea didn't sit well with either of them. The thought that someone within the system might be feeding information to the traffickers made Ryan's skin crawl. If that was true, it meant they couldn't trust anyone beyond their small circle. "We'll figure it out," Jenkins said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We always do." But Ryan wasn't so sure. This felt bigger, more insidious than anything they'd ever faced. He glanced around the abandoned factory, the empty silence mocking their efforts. There were no clues here, no traces left behind to follow, just the chilling message on the wall. "We need to regroup," Ryan finally said. "Pull back and figure out where we went wrong." As they headed back to the precinct, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the children. They were out there somewhere, scared, alone, and waiting for help that hadn't come. The weight of that reality pressed down on him, making every step feel heavier than the last. Once they were back at the station, Captain Morris was already waiting for them, his expression tense. "I take it the raid didn't go as planned," he said, not even trying to mask his frustration. Ryan shook his head. "They knew we were coming. The place was empty." Captain Morris frowned, pacing the floor. "This operation is getting too damn sophisticated. We're missing something, and I don't like it." "We think there might be a leak," Jenkins added. "Someone feeding them information." The captain's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the only thing that makes sense," Ryan replied. "They've been ahead of us every step of the way." The room fell silent as Captain Morris considered the implications. If there really was someone on the inside working with the traffickers, it would explain why their efforts had been stymied at every turn. But it also meant they were dealing with an even more dangerous situation than they had originally thought. "All right," the captain said finally. "We'll keep this between us for now. I'll start looking into any suspicious activity within the precinct. But we need to keep it quiet. If there is a leak, we can't tip them off." Ryan nodded, though the unease in his gut only grew. They were walking a fine line now, balancing their search for the missing kids with the possibility that someone in their own ranks was betraying them. "We'll get to the bottom of it," Ryan said, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. "We have to." As the night wore on, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away from them. The traffickers had been careful, methodical, always staying one step ahead. And now, with the possibility of a mole in their midst, the odds were stacked even higher against them. Early the next morning, Ryan received a call from Ms. Robbins. She sounded concerned, her voice wavering slightly as she spoke. The girl, she had a rough night, she said. Nightmares, panic attacks. I think she's remembering more of what happened. Ryan's heart sank. The girl had already been through so much. The thought of her reliving those nightmares over and over again tore at him. But if she was remembering more, it could mean they were close to finding the missing children. I'll come by and see her, Ryan said. Maybe she'll feel safe enough to talk more. When he arrived at the child services facility, the girl was sitting in a small room, wrapped tightly in a blanket. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, her hands trembling as she clutched her stuffed animal. Ms. Robbins stood nearby, her face full of concern. Ryan knelt beside the girl, his voice soft. Hey there, kiddo. I'm sorry you've had a rough night. The girl didn't say anything at first, just stared at the floor. But after a few moments, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that looked like guilt. I remembered something, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan's breath caught. What is it? You can tell me. She hesitated, her small body tensing under the weight of her memories. There was a man, she said, her voice shaking. He came to the place sometimes. He didn't stay long, but he was in charge. I think he's the one who knew you were coming. Ryan's pulse quickened. Do you remember anything about him? What he looked like? What he said? The girl nodded slowly. He always wore a hat like a baseball cap, and he had this tattoo on his arm. It was a snake. I saw it once when his sleeve rolled up. Ryan's mind raced. A man with a snake tattoo. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It could help narrow down their search, help them figure out who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. You've been really brave, Ryan said, his voice full of admiration. You've helped us more than you know. The girl didn't say anything, just hugged her stuffed animal tighter. Ryan stood up, his mind already whirling with possibilities. The traffickers may have escaped this time, but they had left behind a trail, a small one, but enough to follow, and they weren't going to stop until every child was safe. As Ryan headed back to the precinct, he knew they were running out of time. The traffickers had already shown they were willing to move quickly and ruthlessly to protect their operation. But now, with a new lead and a clearer picture of who they were dealing with, Ryan felt a renewed sense of determination. They had a man with a snake tattoo to find, and once they found him, they would find the children. Ryan's steps quickened as he returned to the precinct, his mind racing through the new details the girl had shared. A man with a snake tattoo, someone who had been in charge, someone with connections deep enough to know they were coming. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in this case, something was more than they'd had in days. Jenkins was already waiting for him when he arrived, leaning against his desk, looking both weary and expectant. What did you get? Jenkins asked, straightening up as Ryan approached. She remembered more, Ryan said, lowering his voice. A man with a snake tattoo on his arm. He's the one who knew we were coming. Jenkins's brow furrowed. That's not a lot to go on, but it's better than nothing. I'll start running it through the system, see if we can pull up any leads. Ryan nodded and sat down at his desk, his mind still churning with thoughts of the girl and the other children who hadn't been rescued yet. Time was slipping away, and every moment they didn't act was a moment those kids could be moved again. Or worse. Jenkins tapped away at his computer, searching through arrest records, surveillance footage, and anything that might turn up a man with a snake tattoo. It was a long shot, but it was their only lead. Ryan paced behind him, his nerves on edge, waiting for something, anything, that would give them a direction to move in. After what felt like hours, Jenkins's face lit up with a flicker of excitement. Got something, he muttered, pulling up a mugshot on the screen. Marcus Snake Watson, small-time crook, in and out of prison for years, drug dealing, armed robbery. And look at this. He zoomed in on the photo, revealing the unmistakable image of a snake tattoo winding its way down the man's arm. Ryan's heart raced. That's him. Watson's got ties to a couple of trafficking rings, but nothing ever stuck, Jenkins continued. He's slippery, always manages to slip through the cracks. But this time, we've got him. Ryan stared at the photo, his mind racing with possibilities. If Marcus Watson was the one pulling the strings, then they had a chance. a real chance, to take down the entire operation. But first, they had to find him. "Where is he now?" Ryan asked, leaning closer to the screen. "Last known address is a rundown apartment complex on the east side," Jenkins said, his voice tense. "But if he's still involved in trafficking, he's not going to stay in one place for long." "We need to move now," Ryan said, already grabbing his jacket, "before he disappears again." Within minutes, Ryan, Jenkins, and a small team of officers were in their patrol cars, speeding toward the east side of town. The apartment complex loomed ahead, dark, decrepit, and barely standing. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, where the law didn't seem to reach, and where the worst of humanity could hide in plain sight. As they pulled up outside, Ryan felt the familiar rush of adrenaline flooding his system. This was it, the break they'd been waiting for. But it was also dangerous. Marcus Watson wasn't just a low-level thug. He was someone who had managed to evade capture for years, and he wasn't going to go down easily. The team approached the building cautiously, weapons drawn, their footsteps silent as they made their way through the crumbling hallways. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest, each step bringing them closer to Watson, or whoever might be inside. The faint smell of mildew and decay clung to the air, making the atmosphere even heavier. They reached Watson's apartment door, and Ryan signaled for the team to move into position. He glanced at Jenkins, who gave him a curt nod, then took a deep breath before kicking the door open. The room inside was dark, but the beam from Ryan's flashlight quickly illuminated the space. The apartment was a mess. Dirty clothes strewn across the floor, broken furniture, and the faint smell of cigarettes and alcohol lingering in the air. But there was no sign of Watson. Ryan's eyes scanned the room, his flashlight catching movement near the back of the apartment. He and Jenkins moved quickly, pushing through the mess and toward a figure hunched over in the corner. "Don't move!" Ryan shouted, his gun trained on the man. The figure slowly turned around, revealing the face of Marcus Watson. Tired, gaunt, but unmistakably the man in the mugshot. He raised his hand slowly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well, well," Watson said, his voice low and gravelly. "Took you long enough." Ryan's grip on his weapon tightened. "Where are the kids?" Watson chuckled darkly. "Kids? I don't know what you're talking about, officer." Ryan stepped closer, his patience wearing thin. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. We've got you, Watson. The trafficking, the kids, the whole operation. You've been running it from the shadows, and now it's over." Watson's smirk didn't falter. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You don't even know the half of it. You've been chasing ghosts while the real players are 10 steps ahead of you." Ryan's blood ran cold. There was something about Watson's confidence that made his skin crawl. This wasn't the behavior of a man who had just been caught. It was the behavior of someone who knew something they didn't. Someone who still held all the cards. "We'll see about that," Ryan said, his voice steady. "You're coming with us." As they cuffed Watson and led him out of the apartment, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of a much larger operation. Watson's words echoed in his mind, filling him with a sense of dread. If the real players were still out there, then the children were still in danger. Back at the station, Watson was processed and taken into custody, but Ryan knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. They had their man, but the network he was a part of was still out there, still preying on vulnerable kids, still hiding in the shadows. As Ryan sat down at his desk, exhaustion tugging at him, Jenkins walked over, a file in hand. "What do you think?" Jenkins asked, tossing the file onto the desk. "You think he's bluffing?" Ryan shook his head. "Number. He's playing us. There's more to this, and he knows it." Jenkins sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, we've got him now. Let's see if we can make him talk." Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at the mugshot of Marcus Watson on the screen. They had come so far, but the battle was far from over. The traffickers were still out there, still moving the kids from place to place, and every second counted. "We need to push harder," Ryan said, determination setting in once again. "We can't let them get away." The air in the interrogation room was thick with tension. Ryan sat across from Marcus Watson, his eyes locked on the man who, despite being in cuffs, still exuded a disturbing calm. Watson leaned back in his chair, his arms resting casually on the table, as if he had all the time in the world. Ryan could feel the weight of every second ticking by. They didn't have the luxury of time. The traffickers were out there, and every moment wasted brought them closer to losing the trail altogether. He had to break Watson, but the man was a seasoned criminal. Ryan could see it in his eyes. He had dealt with cops before, knew all the tricks, and had likely rehearsed his denials long before being caught. Ryan leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "You think this is a game, Marcus? You think you can sit there and smirk while kids are out there suffering because of you?" Watson's smirk deepened, his eyes gleaming with a sick amusement. "I don't know what you're talking about, officer," he said in a mocking tone. "I'm just a small-time guy. You picked up the wrong man." Ryan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching under the table. This man had no remorse, no guilt. But the kids, those kids were counting on him, counting on the system to save them from whatever horrors awaited them if they weren't found. "Enough," Ryan said, his voice cold. "We know you're involved. We have witnesses. We have the children's stories. We found the factory. Don't pretend you're innocent." Watson's eyes flickered just for a moment at the mention of the factory, and Ryan seized on it. "That's right," he continued, his tone sharpening. "We raided it, but we know there are more. We know there's another place. You tell us where it is, and maybe we can work something out." Watson leaned back in his chair again, crossing his arms over his chest. "You're fishing, cop. You got nothing. You wouldn't be sitting here wasting your time with me if you did." Ryan's heart pounded with frustration. Watson was playing them, stringing them along, knowing they were desperate for information. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a glint of arrogance, the kind that told Ryan that Marcus thought he had the upper hand. Ryan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You know what happens to people like you in prison, don't you, Marcus? You might think you're safe in here, but the people you've hurt, the people you've crossed, they'll find you, and they'll make sure you pay for every kid you've trafficked, every life you've destroyed." Watson's smirk faltered for just a second. Ryan knew he had hit a nerve. Traffickers like Watson operated in the shadows, relying on networks of trust and silence. Betrayal wasn't tolerated, and prison wasn't safe for people who trafficked children. "You think you're untouchable?" Ryan pressed. "You're not. The moment you walk into that cell, the moment word gets out about who you really are, you'll be a marked man. No deals, no protection." Watson's eyes narrowed, the amusement fading from his expression. He was calculating, thinking, weighing his options. Ryan stayed silent, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You've got nothing on me," Watson said again, but his voice had lost some of its bravado. "Then prove me wrong," Ryan challenged. "Tell us where the kids are. Tell us who's running the show. Help us, and maybe you walk out of this alive." The room fell silent. Watson stared at Ryan, his jaw tight, his hands flexing slightly as if trying to decide his next move. He was cornered, and Ryan knew it. The question was, would he give them the information they needed? Just when Ryan thought the silence would stretch on forever, Watson exhaled slowly, his eyes flicking toward the mirror in the interrogation room. He knew someone was watching, listening. He knew he couldn't trust anyone in this world, but he also knew the reality of the situation. His life was hanging by a thread, and Ryan was offering him the only chance at survival. "There's a place," Watson said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not what you think." Ryan's heart raced. "Where?" Watson hesitated for a long moment, then leaned forward, his voice low. "The docks. There's a warehouse near the shipyard. They move the kids through there, but they don't stay long. It's a transit point." Ryan's pulse quickened. "How many kids? How often?" Watson shrugged. "Depends. Sometimes a few, sometimes more. They move fast, in and out, always on the move. If you're not there at the right time, you'll miss them." Ryan stood up, his mind already working through the logistics. The docks were close. If they moved fast enough, they could get there before the traffickers cleared out. He turned to Jenkins, who had been watching the interrogation from behind the glass. "We need to move now," Ryan said, his voice urgent. "Get the team ready. We're going to the docks." Minutes later, Ryan and Jenkins were back in the patrol car, speeding toward the shipyard with a convoy of officers behind them. The city passed by in a blur, the streets eerily quiet as the weight of what they were about to do settled over them. This was it. This was their chance to shut down the operation for good, to save the kids before they were lost forever. As they approached the docks, the faint sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air. The warehouses loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, their shadows stretching across the empty streets. Ryan's heart raced as they parked and approached the area on foot, moving silently through the shadows. The warehouse Watson had mentioned was just ahead, its windows dark, its doors sealed tight. Ryan's pulse quickened as they reached the entrance, his hand hovering over his gun. He gave Jenkins a nod, and with one swift motion, they breached the door. Inside, the scene was chaotic. The traffickers had already begun moving the kids, but they hadn't expected the raid. Children, huddled in small groups, looked up in shock and terror as the officers stormed in. The traffickers scrambled, shouting orders and trying to flee, but Ryan and his team moved quickly, cutting off their escape routes. Ryan's heart pounded as he and Jenkins swept through the warehouse, freeing the children and apprehending the traffickers. The kids were scared, dirty, and exhausted, but they were alive. Ryan felt a surge of relief wash over him as he knelt beside one of the children, a young black boy no older than 6, his eyes wide with fear. "You're safe now," Ryan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We're here to help you." The boy didn't say anything, just nodded, his small body trembling with relief. Ryan's heart ached for these kids, for everything they had been through. But he knew they had won a battle tonight. They had saved lives. As the last of the traffickers were loaded into patrol cars and the children were taken to safety, Ryan stood outside the warehouse, the weight of the night pressing down on him. They had done it. They had stopped the operation, at least for now. But as he looked out over the darkened docks, the sound of the waves crashing in the distance, Ryan knew the fight wasn't over. There were still more children out there, more traffickers hiding in the shadows. And until they were all brought to justice, he wouldn't rest. As the dust settled around the docks, the feeling of triumph was palpable. Ryan stood by the water, breathing in the salty air, but he couldn't shake the sense that something was still off. The operation had gone too smoothly, and for all of Marcus Watson's arrogance in the interrogation room, Ryan knew there had to be more. Just then, Jenkins walked up beside him, his face still shining with the adrenaline of the raid. "We got them all," Jenkins said, his voice carrying a rare tone of optimism. "The kids are safe, and we've got the traffickers locked up." Ryan nodded, but his gut told him this wasn't over. He'd been in this game too long to believe the top players had been taken down this easily. "Yeah, we got these guys," he said, glancing back toward the patrol cars. "But Watson, he was too confident. I think he's just a pawn in a bigger game." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "What, you think we missed someone?" Before Ryan could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Captain Morris. "We need to talk. Watson's been playing us." Ryan's stomach dropped. "Speak of the devil," he muttered, showing the message to Jenkins. Jenkins frowned. "What now?" Ryan dialed Morris immediately, and when the captain picked up, his voice was grim. "You're not going to like this, Ryan," Morris said. "We've been reviewing Watson's background and recent activity. Turns out the guy's been working with someone inside the precinct." Ryan's heart pounded. "Inside the precinct? You mean—" "Yeah," Morris confirmed. "There's a mole, and that's how Watson and his people knew we were coming. This whole thing was a setup. Watson wanted us to find him." Ryan's mind raced. "But why? Why let himself get caught?" Morris paused, the weight of the revelation heavy in his voice. "Because the real boss is still out there. And Watson, he's already made his deal. He's cutting loose." Ryan's eyes widened. "What kind of deal?" "The kind where he walks free in exchange for giving us false leads," Morris said bitterly. "He's playing us, Ryan. The raid at the docks, it was never the main operation. The kids we rescued were important, but the bigger operation is still going on. And Watson's making sure we're looking in all the wrong places." Ryan felt his blood boil. They had been chasing shadows, all while the real traffickers kept moving, slipping through their fingers. "So what now?" Ryan asked, his voice sharp with frustration. Morris sighed. "I'm pulling all the intel I can on Watson and anyone who's been working with him. But you need to stay sharp, Ryan. Whoever the mole is, they're still out there. Trust no one." Ryan hung up the phone, his heart racing. He turned to Jenkins, his face pale with the weight of the news. "We've got a problem," he said. "A big one." Jenkins frowned. "You think Watson's still got people inside?" Ryan nodded. "Not just people, someone high up. He's been setting us up this whole time, feeding us false leads, and there's a mole helping him." Jenkins cursed under his breath. "This just keeps getting better." Ryan glanced around the docks, his mind working overtime. Watson had been playing them, leading them on a wild goose chase while the real operation continued elsewhere. But where? Suddenly his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text, an anonymous message. "Check the cargo ships. You missed something." Ryan stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. He showed the message to Jenkins, who raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous tip? You think it's legit?" Ryan's gut told him it was. "I don't know, but it's all we've got. Let's check it out." The two of them made their way back to the docks, where the massive cargo ships were docked, looming over the water like silent giants. The ships had seemed inactive, but Ryan had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. As they approached one of the larger ships, Ryan's instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. There was no crew in sight, no activity at all. Yet the ship looked recently loaded, the crates stacked high on the deck. "Let's go," Ryan whispered, drawing his gun. They boarded the ship quietly, moving through the shadows, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The creaking of the ship's hull echoed around them, but otherwise, everything was still. Too still. Ryan reached one of the large containers, his heart racing. With a swift motion, he pulled the latch and opened the door. Inside, he found what he had been dreading. More children, huddled together in the darkness, their faces pale with fear. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. "They were hiding them in plain sight," Jenkins muttered, his voice thick with disgust. Ryan's eyes scanned the children, relief flooding through him. They had found them, more of the kids who had been trafficked. But as he turned to leave, his phone buzzed again. Another message. "You're out of time. Watch your back." Before Ryan could react, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He spun around, gun raised, just as a figure emerged from the shadows. Captain Morris. "Morris?" Ryan's voice was filled with confusion. Morris smirked, his hands in the air as if to surrender. "Sorry, Ryan, but I warned you. Watson's not the only one pulling strings." Ryan's mind raced as the truth crashed down on him. Morris wasn't just investigating the mole. He was the mole. He had been playing both sides, helping the traffickers while pretending to lead the investigation. Jenkins moved closer, gun drawn. "You've been setting us up this whole time?" Morris shrugged. "Business is business, and trafficking is good business." Ryan's pulse raced. He had trusted Morris. They all had. And now he was standing in front of the man who had orchestrated it all. "Drop the gun, Ryan," Morris said smoothly. "There's no need to make this messy." But Ryan wasn't backing down. His finger tightened on the trigger, his body coiled with tension. "You think I'm just going to let you walk away after everything you've done?" Morris's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You're out of options, Ryan. You know that." For a moment, everything was still. Then in a flash, Ryan fired, his shot hitting Morris square in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back. Jenkins moved in quickly, cuffing the captain before he could recover. Ryan stood there, breathing hard, the weight of everything that had happened crashing down on him. The mole had been caught, but the cost had been high. As they led Morris away, Ryan turned back to the children, who were being escorted off the ship by the other officers. Relief washed over him, but the knowledge that this operation had gone deeper than he'd ever imagined left a bitter taste in his mouth. It was over, for now. But Ryan knew there were always more like Morris, hiding in the shadows, waiting for their chance. "Let's get these kids home," Jenkins said quietly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Ryan nodded, his heart full of both relief and sorrow. The fight wasn't over, but tonight they had won a small victory, and that, for now, was enough. As the sun began to rise over the docks, Ryan stood there, watching the light break over the water. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning for the children they had saved. And for Ryan, that was what mattered most. The end.